The way this works is that now we have a petition which has over 3,500 signatures, and we will debate that. We will ask the petition organiser, Mike Moran, to speak for up to 5 minutes, and he will present the petition. Then we'll invite debate from councillors and give the Mayor an opportunity to respond to the debate. As with this type of report, we will not move to a formal vote. I suggest it would be appropriate for the issues raised in the petition and the comments of members during the debate in this meeting to be referred to the Mayor in order that he can consider his response. So first of all, I shall ask Mark Moran to present the petition with up to 5 minutes. Have we got the microphone?
Yeah, I've got the microphone, but we don't have a mayor. So I think it's a bit inappropriate that I should be doing this right now.
I have to say the Mayor has just popped out for a natural break. He will be back very, very shortly. So,
would you mind if I did the same, actually, if we're going to be here for another 45 minutes? Here he is, okay.
Right, Mr. Moran, could you speak for 5 minutes, please?
Could we start the clock at 0 then, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Lord Mayor, Mr. Mayor, councillors, council officers who apparently are not here. Logic is a word I'm going to use quite a bit. I'm not against residents' parking schemes. This is about the whole city and not just one area or those that are currently affected. I'm going to give you some facts. All areas have rejected this, but it's gone ahead anyway. Consultation has been a sham every time. Implementation has been a joke. In every survey, consultation, opinion poll, whatever you want to look at, the constant number has been 85% of people against these schemes. Hundreds, if not thousands of parking spaces have literally been stolen by the council for no apparent reason. There's been a massive extension of double yellow lines, about 20% reduction in parking. In Stapleton Road, businesses are reporting a 20 to 50% drop in revenues since the introduction of the schemes. In Cotton, businesses have moved out. In Clifton Wood, it's harder to park at night now than it was before the scheme started. In Clifton, 31% of businesses are likely to move away or have already decided to do so as a result of these schemes. Nurses, hairdressers, teachers, all sorts of people are actually being forced out of their jobs. 70% of RPZ zones are dedicated to residents only all day, and the remaining 30% is available for both residents and paying people who pay to park. The result of that is empty streets during the day and overfull streets during the night. There is no logic. At the Mayor's question time last week, he was asked what he had to say to people who had directly been forced out of their jobs as a result of the schemes. And he said the best he could come up with is change is difficult, they'll get used to it. Well, frankly, that is not good enough. If I lost a leg or my house burned down, I'd get used to it. Well, you know, come on. Bristol deserves something better than this, and basically it's got to the point now where a legal challenge has been trying to be established through crowdfunding. There are 3 areas of challenge. One is that the surplus revenues are going to be used for things other than transport. That's illegal. The council predetermined its actions. That's illegal. And it's been pretty shoddy in getting planning permission up in Clifton Village. This isn't an empty threat. Basically, if the funding target is reached, the action is coming. The Mayor and his council officers are actually out of control on this and some other issues. Reasoning, polite protest have achieved nothing. They've just bulldozed these plans through. The Mayor seems to thrive on being the centre of attention and being seen as the architect of these plans. He claims he's making the decisions because someone has to make these things happen. Some of me admires that, but this is in the face of monumental opposition every time these schemes have been proposed in the last 30 years. The reality, though, I think, is that the Mayor's actually something of a puppet here. I mean, if you think sort of spitting image, there's hands up the red trouser legs that are pulling the strings. And these hands actually belong to unelected officials who are using the mayor as cover for some form of social engineering. The mayor, of his own admission, is not a detail man, and fair enough. He's not the one making the decisions on the ground to extend these double yellow lines. It's madness. The real drivers are unelected, unaccountable, and actually they should be unemployable for the damage they're doing to this city, and not just with RPZs. The whole process is a bad joke, but you're dealing with people's lives here. Bristol should not be getting bullied by someone who came into office saying, "I am now a servant of the people." I'm going to finish on what I hope is a positive note, because I don't believe you ever get into an argument or a debate unless you've got an alternate view. You can't just jump up and down and say you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, which sadly does happen quite a lot, certainly in politics. But here's a logical suggestion. Let's find a parking system that works. Extend parking rather than reduce it. RPZ, all pay and display 24 hours a day, and the pay and display should just run at 3-hour blocks. That would stop the commuter problem, and it would stop overnight blocking of residential areas. Simple, effective, easy to set up. Make it the same everywhere so people understand it, so we don't have the confusion we've currently got, and it would probably raise more money than the current schemes. However, if the goal is the removal of all cars, as it seems to be, then this simple idea that will probably satisfy most people, it's got no chance. So we've got to fight the madness a little bit more. The crowdfund can be found by Googling crowdfund RPZ, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Councillor Jama.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd first of all like to thank the gentleman for bringing this petition to the Council's attention. I represent the ward of Lawrence Hill, which currently has an active RPZ scheme. You may ask what some of the problems are with the scheme. Well, I'll tell you, it seems as though every single person living in that zone, whether they are isolated at home, disabled, or whether they are business people, seem to be suffering from the consequences of an ill thought out scheme. In terms of the consultation, George, myself and Councillor Hickman raised this with you over a year ago. The consultation was not inclusive. Lawrence Hill is one of the most diverse wards in Bristol, and you were bringing in a scheme which is putting on an additional amount of money to every single household, and the council did not have the courtesy of sending out letters that were translated. Worse than that, you mentioned earlier on that anyone who during this soft implementation stage has been fined, that the council would look upon that favourably. Well, what do you say to the businesses in Lawrence Hill who over the 6 months that the scheme has been implemented have reported losses of £130,000, £89,000 in one of the country's most poorest wards? How do you expect communities to come together and lift themselves out of poverty if you are so gung-ho, or might I say that your officer is so gung-ho on pushing through this scheme? This needs a different way, George. This needs a different way. To say is, I understand that you give a lot of direction and delegation to your officers, and that's all good and well, but can I just make the suggestion that you use your executive power to step in and stop the council's implementation when you can see that vulnerable people, business owners, are being pushed into the ground. This is absolutely disgraceful, George. And let me list them all: the disabled, those that are isolated within their homes, business owners. This is ridiculous, George. Take notice. These people will not forget come 2016 when it's your turn for election.
Councillor Woodman.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I hadn't planned on speaking in this debate because the reality is that representing the city centre, the majority of my ward is covered by the central control parking zone, and the residents' parking zones by and large don't really affect the residents that I represent. But having heard other councillors discuss the issues in their wards, I thought it might be helpful if I share my own experience of seeing a residents' parking zone be rolled out in part of my wards, but in Kingsdown specifically. When I stood for election in 2007, so nearly 8 years ago now, I did it on a clear platform of supporting residents' parking zones. Now, the reason for that was quite clear. As far as I was concerned, the residents of Kingsdown were crying out for the council to do something about the problem of chronic commuter parking, about their air quality being damaged, about their quality of life being destroyed, about the fact that fire engines couldn't get down their street, that ambulances couldn't get to people who were dying because commuters had carelessly parked blocking corners and obstructing the streets. I think the fact that I was elected in 2007 just goes to show that the residents did support that principle. But support is the key word here. When I was campaigning for the Kingsdown residents parking zone to be rolled out, I was absolutely clear that we had to do it with the support of the residents. And we consulted and we discussed, and I chaired a scrutiny commission meeting in this chamber where we had more people in the public gallery than this. And we designed the scheme and we redesigned the scheme and we redesigned it again. And then just for good measure, we gave the residents a final opportunity to say, here's the finished product, do you support it? And the reality is that actually, yes, they did. And to test that, the council has regularly reviewed the Kingsdown scheme. I personally surveyed every single resident in Kingsdown to ask them whether post-implementation they thought it was a good idea, and a shocking 92% of them said that they thought it was. But perhaps the ultimate test was, in 2007, having stood for election on the platform of supporting this, I stood for election in 2011, and guess what? I'm still here. I think it's quite clear that where you work with the residents and you design a scheme that has resident support and buy-in, actually residents' parking schemes can work and they can be good for Bristol. Now, as I said, I wasn't planning on speaking in this debate because I know that the experience of other wards and other councillors has not been as positive as mine was with the Kingsdown scheme. And we hear tales of rubbish consultation and botched implementations, and I think that's unfortunate. And I think there are issues with residents' parking, and my motion later on the agenda, which we probably won't get to, deals with one of those specifically, which is the use of permit fees and the fact that, worryingly, despite officer assurances as far back as 2008 that this wouldn't happen, we are now seeing RPZs potentially being used as a cash cow to fund general revenue expenditure for the City Council. My concern with the petition is that it takes an absolute position. It calls for all residents' parking zones to be scrapped where they've been introduced already. And as I said, my experience in Kingsdown is actually I don't think the residents would want that. Now, we're not going to have a vote on this, so I'm not going to need to actually cast a vote one way or another. But I just wanted to put that on the record that I think certainly in Cabot Ward we wouldn't say that just scrapping them is the way forward. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. To start with, I think it only fair to point out that in the run-up to the election last May, I did put out leaflets in Southville which specifically supported the concept of residents' parking. I don't know how many people actually read political leaflets, but I was elected on that basis. There were some provisos, but I did support it then and continue to do so now. One of those provisos was that residents' parking should work for those with genuine mobility issues. That is why I submitted a budget amendment asking for blue badge holders to get RPS permits for free. It was passed unanimously with the wish that it be a starting point, that blue badge holders get the best possible scheme that they can, preferably just being exempted from the scheme as a whole. I do hope the Mayor and the Labour Party's Councillor Bradshaw, who is implementing residents' parking, take this on board. A second proviso was that it work for local traders. We have just been through the consultation, the formal consultation in Southville. I have spoken to a number of North Street traders who are deeply concerned about the impact that residents' parking will have on their livelihoods. The Bedminster Town team has had discussions with officers and came up with a set of proposals for the scheme. I don't necessarily agree with all of their proposals, but, well, it isn't my livelihood at stake. I, for one, would have liked to have seen a lot more research done about shopping habits of people using North Street shops to allow a much more scientific assessment of the proposals. We didn't get that. What we are getting is, assuming Southville gets its go-ahead, is a fingers-crossed approach. I've yet to address the third proviso that it work for those on low incomes, but still intend to do so. Residence parking is not all bad. There is no doubt that numbers of areas of this city have parking problems. These are for a variety of reasons, but one is undoubtedly commuter parking, which the scheme is designed to address. I also believe it will have a small impact on the numbers of vehicles owned by residents. I had hoped, as part of the scheme, it may have been possible to look at other ways we might use our streets, not just as a car park, but also a place for children to play in, people to walk and cycle on. I still hope these things can happen. If there's one thing which is obviously true, we cannot live in a truly sustainable city if it is clogged up with cars. We need a radically different mix.
Need decent transport.
We do. The consultation in Southville has been deeply disappointing. I did speak to George about some concerns held by people locally. He passed this on to officers who refused to speak to local people. Their rationale was something to do with it being the formal consultation period. The impact of this has been that numbers of local people, who for the most part have practical suggestions to make about residence parking and how to improve it around their homes, have been needlessly antagonised. I can only hope that their concerns, if they remain post-implementation, will be genuinely dealt with come the review. For those who just want residence parking removed, legal action aside, the only way that you will achieve this is by having a mayor who will do so. While I can't presuppose what policies we will have for the mayoral election, I am confident that we will continue to support the principle of residence parking schemes. However, given the undeniable evidence of restricted consultation, I would be encouraging any Green Party mayoral candidate to review the level of consultation that has taken place, and where it's clear that it has been inadequate, to implement appropriate changes to make the scheme more closely match the wishes of local residents and traders. Thank you for your time.
Councillor Mead.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and fellow councillors. My biggest issue with the RPZ system and scheme has been that it is typical of the big schemes that have been introduced under the current mayor. It's that back of a fag packet, not thought through properly and not properly scrutinised kind of policy issue. Because it wasn't properly planned in advance, a lot of the knock-on impacts are now having to be addressed retrospectively. We've seen that there's a knock-on impact on small businesses, on social workers who do home visits, on HMOs where lots of residents may own cars because they need to get to work, areas with poor public transport links, people reliant on cars due to health or mobility issues, people who work unsociable hours when there aren't buses to be caught, and people who work in multiple locations and have to make several journeys per day. I was interested to see that in one of the answers to one of the questions, the Mayor didn't take up the bus challenge. Now, I do the bus challenge every wretched day of my life because I don't own a car. I do have a driving licence, but I only ever get to use it to prove my age. It's the curse of my youthful complexion. But we are seeing in many parts of Bristol, particularly in North Bristol, we're seeing that people are getting rid of their front gardens to put in driveways, which is a lovely legacy for the Green Capital year. I'm sure not quite on a par with what's going on at Stapleton allotments, but I'm sure it's certainly up there as part of the policy of greying Bristol rather than greening it. I have an issue as a member of the Planning Committee. There are a number of times when small little developments turn up on someone's back garden or on someone's garage or in a little bit of green space somewhere, and you gradually see parking problems emerging where there were none to start with. Now, I support any neighbourhood that wants its own RPZ. I have no issue with any group of people saying we would like to have this implemented, and it seems to have worked in Kingsdown. That's a great example. But I know that in my own ward of Horfield, it's become the second biggest issue in my inbox. It's not actually being proposed for Horfield for perhaps a couple of years to come. But people are worried. And people are worried because they know that they don't have many alternative options. And a good example of the kind of nonsense people have to go through if they don't have a car. I've had the misfortune of having to visit my party's regional office in Brislington, and to get there by bus took a quarter of an hour less than it would have taken for me to go from central Bristol to central London on a coach. People don't have that kind of spare time. I'm sad to say I did that day, but they don't have that kind of spare time at waiting at bus stops and being stuck on routes that go all around the mulberry bush to get somewhere. I don't want to have to go via the city centre to get to Brislington if there might be a more direct route. But of course there isn't a bus going along that way. So until we sort out the elephant in the room, which is public transport, and with something more meaningful... And with something more meaningful than another badly planned idea, such as Metrobus, which almost replicates...
Thank you, Councillor Mead.
We will need to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Weston.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Now, originally I was going to lead off with a bit of a Groundhog Day joke, because, you know, we've been here before, but I was then going to a bit baffled. Do I go with Blue Peter, having seen the DIY skills so self-evident? Ollie, I'm suggesting if you have anything better to do rather than go to Brislington, evidently there's some art classes that you can take with your colleagues.
You've got no idea about art, mate.
I'm sure it is beautiful. I look forward to framing it. Now, on RPZs, I mean, I probably call myself a skeptic. Nice. I call myself an RPZ skeptic. But our group position has always been consistent. We don't have a problem with RPZs where they're affordable, reasonable, tailored to the needs of the community, but above all, they go in with their consent. Now, this did happen in the early days. I mean, the Kingsdown and all the rest of it. I said I was a skeptic, not denying anything. But the problem we have, and we sort of have it, keeping them coming, we sort of had it with the libraries, in the fact we do a consultation, but rather than being a genuine consultation, it sort of becomes a bit of a, well, we know you love the policy, please now tell us how much. There's no option to say, well, hang on, I disagree with what you're doing. There's no option to say, I don't want an RPZ. There's no option to say, I don't want you to close my library. This kind of level of consultation that we indulge in as City Council is lacking. Now, George, you say you're not a details man. I suggest you have to get hold of these details when they come out, because it's creating some genuine hostility. These issues are not new. We're 2 years on, and it's still rolling on. It's still continuous, this cantankerous sore in our civil gut. Now, what we have to do, surely, is get away from the idea, and we were promised that this wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach, but it does just seem to be a minimal variant on a theme. Surely we can tailor the RPZs better suited to the communities, to the business interests in our communities, so they can better reflect the residents' and businesses' need. Because I'd imagine with the residents, I know we have residents here who are in favour of RPZs, but you also like the shops and lifestyles that go around with where you live. I'm sure there's a balance that can be struck if we're prepared to think outside of the box, but actually we never seem to do. There's so little imagination. And again, we had this in the libraries. When the report came out, what an ambitious proposal we all read. There was nothing there. We can do so much better. And my fear is, I mean, we're not going to vote on this now. It's going to go to the Mayor, and the Mayor will decide what he's going to do. But all of this, from my concern, is it all feeds into a continual anti-motorist sentiment. Now, it's all well and good if you live in the city centre and your bus arrives every 10 minutes. Maybe it doesn't go to Brislington and the Labour office. I'm sure there's a joke there. I'll think later on. But when you live on the outskirts, when you live in Henbury and Brentford, we don't have that public transport. But when you combine the RPZs, when you combine it with the lack of the public transport, you combine it with 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, built-out bus stops, inappropriate bus lanes, it all just grinds our way of life and our need to work and get around our city into the dust. And George, you have to look at these things again, and I would urge you, if you're going to look at the outer ring, which I know Councillor Mead alluded to earlier, this has to be with the consent of the public. Do a proper consultation and one with the option of saying no. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to clarify the point about petitions that George was making with regards to 25% not being from in or from Bristol. You know, it does clearly state on the council website that if you live, work or study in Bristol, you can sign the petition. I'd also like to thank Alex for clarifying and detailing the success that he had in Kingsdown, because he's identified the best model for how these schemes should have been rolled out. Consent, as everybody says, should have been the way forward. You know, RPZ, here we are again. How many petitions, how many debates, how many recommendations ignored from the working group, how many emails from residents expressing incredulity that their objections, suggestions, ideas have been disregarded? How is this all possible when all along we have all heard the Mayor say he is listening? My inbox is full of concerned emails from residents, and social media is awash with examples of RPS failings. The dreaded yellow lines that eat into parking spaces that have existed for years, or conservation areas blighted with signage and street furniture, or schemes declared live when bays are still being marked out, and pay and display machines that haven't been switched on whilst businesses prepare to shut up shop and leave. Then we have a council budget revelation that the permit costs are a stealth tax, a revenue-raising exercise in contravention of legislation as confirmed to me by the local government association officers, and accordingly I have written to the Secretary of State, Mr. Pickles, to bring our Bristol predicament to his attention. I've raised with him the legality of the parking tax being used as a mortgage to fund other capital projects in the city, courtesy of Labour's credit card budget amendment, voted through with the Tory party support. So, we've heard all this before, and we can predict what the stock response will be. So let me try a different tack. Let's play the game. If I was running for mayor, what policies would I honestly detail in my manifesto? Bearing in mind that this mayor left out his plans for an imposed RPS. I'd abandon the quest for an outdated ITA and pursue as a priority the new model to be found in a combined authority. I'd introduce franchising and contract bus operators to provide our citizens with the best public transport, and not for our citizens to provide operators with the best profitable routes. I'd roll back overzealous yellow lines. I'd reverse the 20-mile-an-hour on the main arterial roads in and out of our city. I'd put parking in the arena. I'd invest in hydrogen technology, a refuelling station in the centre of town, funds for which we need to be making a bid for now. I'd introduce flexibility to the zones so that people within them can freely travel across them. I'd lift the restrictions on blue badge holders to allow parking wherever, whenever, in all the zones. And I'd axe the Labour parking tax. From day one in office, I'd reduce the permit cost, and I'd keep reducing it until it was free. Did I say if I was running for mayor? Perhaps I should have said when.
Thank you. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I'm not running for mayor. I'd like to make that very clear. I am, however, a fan of the RPZ scheme that is being delivered in Clifton. And And the reason I'm a fan is that the people who voted for me to sit in this chamber on their behalf, the majority of them, the silent majority, are in favour, and something had to be done in Clifton.
They won't be doing it again.
I accept there are issues, and one size does not fit all. But the majority, the silent majority of residents in Clifton. We listen to you, please. You listen to me now. The vast majority of residents in Clifton, as members will have seen from the statements that have been submitted to tonight's discussions, the vast majority of Clifton Village residents want this scheme. I would like to take this opportunity to praise officers who have engaged with Councillor Jank and I in designing and delivering the scheme. They have worked in incredibly difficult circumstances and have delivered a scheme that will work for the residents of Clifton. So, we all hope that it works brilliantly well for traders. It has worked for the traders in Cottam. They have recently asked for, as part of the review, for their hours of operation to be extended. The hours in Clifton have gone, in my view, as I made the point to the Mayor in a question earlier, in my view, too long. 9 till 9 is too long. But the principle about 6 days a week of having controlled residence parking in this part of the city is absolutely vital. So, contrary to the scaremongering of certain individuals, of certain elements of the media, and the vocal minority, some of whom are sitting here, contrary to that, the vast majority of residents in my ward in Clifton do support residence parking and do not support this petition. I can happily prove it just by showing you my emails. The comments apply that Councillor Woodman made, that I was elected on the back of pledging to support residence parking, and we should all continue to work with the Mayor to deliver a scheme where it is required and where the people who live there want it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're getting towards a time limit. Obviously, the Mayor will need to reply to this. I have now 4 more members who wish to speak. I do know that you, Councillor Abraham, are one of those. I would ask you just to do perhaps a short speech. Can I first of all ask Councillor Hopkins for a 1.5-minute speech, please?
To all my colleagues when they get firstly elected to watch Yes Minister. As well as being extremely funny, it's frighteningly accurate. And what happens there is that officers produce out of the bottom drawer, when somebody new is in power, some of the old chestnuts which previous regimes have rejected. We saw the libraries policy, the toilets policy, because they were all going to be closed, if you remember, and the RPZ. And I can tell you from personal experience that the blanket RPZ was offered to us as a policy by officers because they felt that was the way forward. We did not. We actually implemented the scheme in Kingsdown because, as my colleague said, people there wanted it. But what really annoys me more than anything about this is actually the misnomer of residence parking zones. Because bluntly, when you ask people, when you ask the residents, do you want that? It can become a residence parking zone if they want it. If you impose it without the residents having a say, without them actually being involved, it is not a residence parking zone. And bluntly, we're in a position where it's been used as a tax, it's been used against the will of a lot of residents, and I would be more than happy to see the polls to show who is in favour and who is against. I'm not against the principle, as a lot of others have said. I'm absolutely absolutely opposed to the way this is actually being done. It is absolutely disgraceful. We actually have, as was found out on a scrutiny commission, a £500,000 surplus already in that fund. We actually set charges when the Kingsdown scheme was brought in that were just enough to cover the costs, and we told residents, and we actually meant it, that in 5 years' time, when the scheme was paid for, their charges would actually be reduced, and we meant that. And that, I'm afraid, has been ripped up by the Mayor, and there's no way that he can actually claim that the charges being imposed now are not designed to make a profit, because they are, and that, in my view, is not fair and it's not legal.
Cllr Abraham.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I could develop my argument about for or against the RPZ, but the time doesn't allow me to do that. So I'll be precise and brief. If you're going to have an RPZ, and I think there is a lot of merit in it, you have to take the people with you. They have to understand it. They have to be able to afford it. And if they can't afford it, there's got to be a way around it to help them. It's got to be a parking scheme for them, not for us, or not for personal aggrandizement and try to make yourself look good and green. I had the privilege of spending some time with the most senior traffic officer who introduced parking schemes into London. And his advice was, go slow, introduce it, and then wait till people ask for it. Then you'll take them with you, then it will work. And so I support this petition. I support it because I genuinely believe it's not just about Clifton, it's about our city and what sort of city you want to live in. Do you want us to just hand over to the city council controlling you and the way you move? Because I believe that is totally undemocratic. There has to be a better way in this here. And the best way I know, if I've got something wrong, is hands up, say I've got it wrong, and think again.
And Councillor Holland.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and I want to also thank the lead petitioner for the work that's happened to get the signatures onto this petition and allow us to be able to debate it tonight. The test of a good policy is that once it's in, I think on the anniversary of Tony Benn's death, it's one of the things that he said. You start off with everybody objecting to it, and then by the end, you can't find anybody who thinks it's a bad idea. And that's certainly true of Kingsdown and the number of people who want to try and claim the credit for putting the Kingsdown scheme in, because I think it's a scheme that we started way back and then a Liberal Democrat administration came in and worked on it. And it was exactly as Alex said. It was exactly as Alex said. The residents had... I can remember taking them up to public meetings there myself, have maps and plans of each street with every bit of every line designated on it, and they could comment, and real change happened as a result of it. Now, funny enough, I remember, and it's already been mentioned, that we've already spent inordinate amounts of time having this debate in this chamber, but what's changed? Very little, and nothing for the better. And I remember standing here, and at the time when we had the last debate about it, about a year ago, pleading with George that if you took people with us, we could get to the place he wants to get to. You would get there more slowly, but you would get there in a more consensual way, taking time to get things right. And actually, although he might think on the face of it taking longer costs more, if as we've been told tonight, there's a legal challenge that's going to come to the City Council, we all know that that will be hugely expensive. And again, it has already been said that we need to be in a position where other residential areas are looking at the schemes and saying, we need some of that. Now, I don't like speaking as a resident rather than as a representative of my ward, because I don't live in the ward that I represent. And Charlie has already spoken about the Southville consultation, but it has angered so many people, and so many people who are in principle in favour, as I am, of residents parking where it's needed and where it's appropriate, that you only have to look at the sorts of comments that people are making now to realise that this is going to very badly backfire. My time's running out, so I just wanted to point out that in many of the statements, I've underlined them all, but I can give them to George if he hasn't read them, but even people who are in favour of residents parking have said things like Alistair Sorday has said in his statement, number 33, it would be far better to continue to introduce RPZs while being sensitive to improvements and adjustments. So everybody, even people who were encouraged to write in favour of RPZ for our debate tonight, still recognise that those improvements need to be made. George, please take the time to do this properly. Make it introduced where people want it and where they have real influence about what happens, and ultimately that will cost far less to the City Council.
Thank you. We have now coming to the end of the time. Apologies to Councillor Hickman who wanted to say something, but I think we've all seen your placard, so thank you for that. I will now ask Councillor.
Can we extend the time, please? Actually, excuse me. I wanted to talk about the one-size-fits-all.
I'm terribly sorry, but we've come across time.
I'll do it in 1 minute.
No,
I'll do it in 1 minute.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I'm very sorry to you, but my ruling is I will now ask Mayor Ferguson to respond. Thank you, Mayor Ferguson.
I think this is terrible.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
That's democracy.
I'm sorry. I've made my ruling. Thank you very much. We will move on. Mayor Ferguson.
George, can you just let Councillor Hickman talk about what Lawrence Hill residents are going through? I think that would be very honourable of you. Thank you.
This is the Lord.
Excuse me.
It's the Lord Mayor's meeting.
Mayor Ferguson is not in charge of the meeting. I am. I've made a ruling. I will now ask the Mayor to respond. Thank you.
I could have spoken in this time.
Thank you.
If it's not going to be held there, people can't speak, we'll have it on the street.
I wasn't even going to say something terribly controversial.
She represents people who are affected by the issue that we're discussing. I think she ought to be heard.
I am charged with the conduct of this meeting, and I have ruled, and I would ask the Mayor Ferguson to make his response now, please.
It's taken you about 2 or 3 minutes to sort this out. She could have spoken and sat down in less time.
Yeah. Thank you, Lord Mayor. When I was elected, in November 2012, I said that I'm determined to leave this city a better place than I found it. And as much as I understand many of the concerns that are raised, and many of the concerns are absolutely valid, I am absolutely determined that we deal with some of the crucial issues in this city of health, of congestion, of safety, and I'm absolutely determined that the residents of this city have more convenient and better lives. The residence parking scheme is one part of a greater jigsaw that is going to make this city a better place. It contributes to reducing the amount of single-car drivers, and 90% of cars that come into this city don't have a passenger in the prime times of congestion. It's designed to encourage people to share cars. It's designed to get people to think about alternative modes of transport. It's designed to enable us to improve the public transport system, and it is doing so. And whatever you may think of public transport in Bristol, and it's not perfect, it is certainly on the rise in terms of its use and its punctuality. I want to make quite sure that our children breathe clean air. I want to make quite sure that we don't take years off their lives and their life expectancy. I want to make sure that the poorest areas of this city that suffers most from poor health have that health improved. I want to make sure that we have a fair... I want to make sure we have a fairer city, that we invest in the major public transport infrastructure that encourages people, such as the Metrobus, out of their cars. So, while I understand the issues that have been raised, and while I am absolutely determined that we improve situations where we can, and we shall do as each of the residence parking zones come up for review, I have listened to quite a lot of misrepresentation. I was misrepresented in some of the things that I've said by some people, but I understand that, you get stories and people believe what they hear. But you don't have to believe me, but I'm only in this job to make a better place. And I will only quote one thing that any councillor said in this debate, and that is Councillor Helen Holland, who said we must be, quoting Alistair Sorday, that we must be sensitive to improvements and adjustments. I am, I'm listening, we shall be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.